I'm Paul Sullivan, your host on the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, sublime, strange, and silly aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men often feel they have to hide or at least not talk about their parenting role. I know this from firsthand experience as a lead dad to my 3 girls, 3 dogs, 3 cats, and somewhat remarkably, 3 fish to continue living. I did this all while managing my career and striving to be an above average husband. One thing I know for sure about being a lead dad is it's not a normal role. You're not doing what dads have traditionally done, going to work and leaving the parenting to mom or someone else. Nor are you always welcome in the world where moms are the primary caregivers. But here at the Company of Dads, our goal is to shake all that off and focus on what really matters: family, friendship, finance, and fun. Today, my guest is Jamie Ladge. Dr. Ladge is an associate professor of management and organizational development at the DeMoore McKim School of Business at Northeastern University. She's also a distinguished research professor at the University of Exeter Business School. It's her research interest that made me so keen to talk to her today. She's coming at the work-life debate from both the mother's and the father's perspective. She wrote a book called Maternal Optimism: Forging Positive Paths Through Work and Motherhood. And in a forthcoming book, she also contributed a chapter entitled Impossible Standards and Unlikely Trade-Offs: Can Fathers Be Competent Parents and Professionals? She has 3 sons, and her ex-husband is very much a lead dad. Welcome, Professor Ladge, to the Company of Dads podcast. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Good. First question. I know you live outside of Boston. You're a professor in Boston. You went to school in Boston. So key question here. Tom Brady, greatest athlete ever or greatest athlete in the entire universe?
Oh boy. Can I say both?
What? You have to, right?
Yes.
They'd kick you out of Boston if you didn't, right?
I know,
that
and my
would be
kids
sort
are
of the end of
somewhere
it.
listening. So yes, of course. Greatest of all time, everywhere, all over.
You'd lose your Boston card. I don't know. So, Professor, let's just start with, how did this become your area of interest? What was it about, mothers, but also, fathers, because it's the Company of Dads podcast. What was it about, fathers that piqued your curiosity as an academic, as a researcher?
It was fathers, actually, because I was doing all this research on motherhood. In fact, when I was a doctoral student at Boston College, I spent years, researching all things motherhood, pregnancy experiences, returning to work after maternity leave. In fact, my dissertation was on reentry experiences of first-time mothers. And it was the fathers that constantly, the fathers in the academic world that would say to me, well, what about the dads? You write so much about mothers. What about dads? And I'd be like, well, what about the dads? Is that really interesting? Is there really something interesting to say? And I realized that was really not a good way to think about things. That I was very much out of touch with, or I was very much in line with what societal expectations were talking about, and I needed to get that out of my system and focus on the dads. And interestingly, I actually replicated a lot of the work that I did on motherhood with fathers. And so one of the first studies we looked at was what was the experience like for first-time fathers as they navigated their transition to having a child, and navigating those experiences and what that life was like, looked like for them. And then we did a bigger study that looked a little bit more broadly at those experiences as well.
That's it. What were the big differences between, first-time mothers and first-time fathers with, as you said, the reentry into the workforce? What were the big differences between the two?
Well, so not much, to be honest. For mothers, there are physical and logistical issues, and a lot of it depends on what's negotiated at the couple level. But we particularly were focused on fathers who wanted to be involved, fathers who had set that expectation for themselves and their wives as well. And so we wanted to know what's it like to be an involved dad? What are the pressures and experiences that you have in reentry? Do they take the kind of breaks and parental leave that mothers take? They often don't, because they tend to be more stigmatized for, what I would say, taking it too far, right? It's okay to take a couple weeks off, but 4 months paternity leave, whoa, now you've defying expectations of what it means to be, masculine and what it means to be a man. But those were the things that we were really interested in. And so, I mean, parenting, I would say, is hard work, no matter what. And I think we often ask, we might be asking the wrong questions sometimes, because, if someone says, well, why don't dads step up more? And I would say, well, why would they want to? This is the hardest job on earth, right? I mean, just because some of the caregiving disproportionately falls on mothers. Parenting is hard all around. There are plenty of playbooks. I wrote a book called Maternal Optimism. I'm not always optimistic about parenting. Of course, I have 3 teenage boys, so that might put things into perspective a little bit. But it's hard work, right? And so it's
I can't imagine the book would have done as well if you titled it Maternal Pessimism. I just don't see that, flying off the shelf.
Well, after COVID hit, I thought about it. So
a sequel.
Yeah.
I love a sequel. Yeah. That's one. In your paper, on impossible standards, you write, many questions remain with respect to what it actually means to be an involved father today and the ways in which organizations, i.e., companies, can encourage a more holistic view of men as ideal parents and professionals. And there's lots to unpack there. I mean, if I did my LinkedIn math correct, you were a graduate student, around 2000-ish, 2005? Is that fair? When did you?
Yes,
yeah.
In that time frame, yeah.
So when you look at the sort of 15 years or so between when you finished your PhD and the start of the pandemic, and now the 2 years since the start of the pandemic, what have been the progress points, the encouraging points, and then of course the flip side of that have been, what have been the discouraging points, the things that haven't moved as they relate to fathers taking on a greater role as parents?
Well, the biggest progress point is having conversations like these. When I look at your background, I see Company of Dads, I see organizations that are popping up about fathers. I think just the conversation itself that didn't happen in such explicit ways. It may have happened, maybe a few dads used to get together and talk about parenting, over a beer or in the privacy of their own homes. But we weren't talking about it in such a public way and with such a public debate. It was very much a kind of a hidden discussion point. We didn't talk about it that way. It was always about mothers. When we talked about implementing new policies, this is where I went wrong even with my research. I focused so much on mothers, and I realized, and I have to say, the 2 papers that I published about fatherhood were published even before my dissertation, which was on motherhood. And I think that just speaks to even academics wanting to see this work out there, wanting people to start having these conversations. And then I think the other thing that we've learned is that when fathers are involved, when fathers enter the conversation, that actually only helps mothers. It doesn't hurt them, it helps them, because now everybody's part of that conversation. We used to just have affinity groups that were just for working mothers, and now it's about working parents. And I know I've been very cognizant of opening up that line of communication and just talking more about it. And I think it's become more commonplace for fathers to be able to talk about their role. That it's not so much it's just as much a badge of masculinity to be a good dad as it is, to be a good worker as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I agree. That's what I'm trying to do with the Company of Dads. But I've had some really kind of curious moments since I left the New York Times in October. And a couple of them involve guys that I've known for a long time, golf buddies that I play golf with for 6-7 years. And one in particular, he came up to me and he sort of whispered and he said, I like what you're doing. I'd like to be involved, but can you not use my name? And I'm like, it's the Company of Dads. We're going to create community. We're going to have some fun together. We're going to help each other parent. He's like, yeah, I just don't want my name used. I was like, we're not taking like puppies and putting them in a bag and weighing it down and throwing it in the river. And he wasn't alone. There was so many that came up, and they, I would have never known that they were lead dads. I've always been very open about it. I've got, maybe because I have 3 daughters and it's, I'm the dad sitting at ballet. I'm not sure. But it always struck me. And these are guys, accomplished in their careers, well-educated, well-meaning, and yet they still want to keep it quiet. Yet on the flip side, and this is not a badge of honor. This is a badge of poor judgment. I'm in my third term as class parent for one of my daughters. You do it for one, then you have to do it for all of them. And you would think now in 2022, when you'd start, they'd say, okay, class parents, glad to have everyone there. They start off every call, every Zoom call with, okay, class moms, so great to have you here. And I have this running joke where I'm the guy on the Zoom, lifting up my finger saying, and dad, class, and class dad. So we still have this, but, in your research, we've made progress. But what is it going to take for us to sort of make, it normal for the dad to be the lead dad and the mom to have a career that's much more time consuming and less flexible, and the dad's picking up more of the stuff at home, and yet they're both fulfilled? What are we going to have to do to get there?
Yeah, and I was going to say, I can tell you a similar story. I remember when my kids were in elementary school, there was a stay-at-home dad who was our student class advisor and president. He was always there at the school, and I remember listening to these one group of women say, oh, it's enough already. He needs to get back to work. And I'm thinking to myself, what? He's a great dad. Why would you even say that? And so it's not just the men that I think, hold those societal expectations near and dear. I think some women do as well. And I think that's just it. I think these societal expectations about what it means to be a mom and what it means to be a dad are so deeply ingrained in the way that we think that it does make it very difficult to let those things go. I think just for starters, even what you just said about all the room moms, we need to change our language, right? We're always talking about inclusivity and we need some inclusive language around parenting, and it's not just moms and dads, it's also same-sex couples and I mean traditional families have gone away a long time ago. And so we need to adapt with those times. And unfortunately, it's so deeply ingrained and embedded in who we are that it's going to take a lot to start to normalize what is no longer, normal anymore for what appeared to be normal. It used to be, though, I think it's gotten a little bit better. It used to be, these are things you'd hear from older generations. And I'm hoping, I always say I'm counting on the current generation who have kind of grown up in a whole host of different, with different scenarios and different dynamics that might start to shift even more. But I think it'll take a while. I'm doing some new research right now that's COVID related on working parents. And one of the things that we're finding is that while the dads are more involved, they're still embarrassed about the number of hours that they're working, which is not as much as they're used to working. And so
meaning that they're not working enough, they're not putting enough into their pay.
So we asked them, how many hours are you working? This was the beginning of the pandemic. And I didn't do this particular interview, but one of our research assistants that did the interview said that the guy literally whispered into the Zoom, I'm only working 2 hours a day. And he was embarrassed and horrified to say that. He had to whisper it. And I think it's not just the ideal norms at home around what it means to be a mother and father. It's the deeply ingrained, embedded, workplace norms that make us think that we can't say we've only worked a couple hours today because we did some really cool things with our kids. Who would ever say that? Because there's so much fear around what those implications might be career-wise. And so,
but the reality, professor, is how much time gets wasted in an office? How much time is you're going around and chit-chatting with your buddy? You go outside for a walk, you go get a cup of coffee, somebody comes over to your desk. That person may have only been working 2 hours as it was when he was in the office. Now he's,
and ironically, those are the things that people miss the most about being in the office.
The nonsense, yeah.
Because they could get the work done wherever, right? It was the social stuff that was that mattered. So
it's one of the things I think of as a dad that if I wanted to put into my calendar back at the New York Times, going into an office, if I put in my calendar, daughter's soccer game and blocked out 2.5, 3 hours, everyone would be like, oh yeah, he's at the soccer game, so that's fine. But if I put in my calendar 3 hours. Talk with daughter, read uninterrupted in room with daughter, people would be like, he's slacking off? What's he doing? And I still think that whereas, if you have empowered employees, they're going to get the work done regardless. And if they need to take 2 hours, or they want to take 2 hours to be with the child, either to watch them do something athletic, musical, whatever, or just to be with them, that should be fine. I mean, do you see in your research are any companies, thinking along those lines? Is that something that's, too much to ask in 2022?
There was an article in the Wall Street Journal years ago. I don't know if we quoted it in this chapter, but I know that I've quoted it in another work, where the CEO, a male CEO, actually put his family schedule up on a big whiteboard so that people could actually see where these are uninterrupted times or these are times when you cannot, interrupt me. These are the times I'm with my family. And then what ended up happening is people on his team followed suit. So it became normal that people would know, these are the times that are off limits because these are my family hours and these are my work hours. And so I think there are examples of that. They're probably far and few between. I think there's more examples of normalizing the, what I would call the Seinfeld episode where George Costanza left his car in the parking lot because he wanted to show that he was still there, or people that leave their lamps on, at work to make it seem like they're back, or they have automated emails in the middle of the night. I mean, I've heard a whole host of stories like that, those are the things that end up still getting, normalized. In this study that we just did, the COVID study on working parents, one thing that was really interesting for both mothers and fathers is the normalization of, or almost like a relaxation of ideal parenting norms. And you saw this in all these different memes, out there about, people drinking like during the day with their kids, or their kids are duct taped to a wall while, they're in a meeting or something like that. And I mean, it's some of those borderline on child abuse, but so they're really not all that funny. But in a way, it was kind of saying, listen, the world has gone to, what, and so we need to relax some of these norms. But yet at the same time, they're sitting there on that computer, duct taping their kids so they can work, which really exemplifies that while they were freed from these norms, there's still that fear. And I think the fear wins, when you have to balance those things, it's that fear, again, that just seems to take precedence, which is why I think these norms don't seem to fully dissipate.
So if we had to set up kind of a chicken or the egg scenario here to sort of bring about change, is that change led by the company, by the organization, or is it led by, fathers or mothers saying, look, this isn't right? The mother saying, I don't want to have the second shift anymore. You've got to do more of the parenting. And the father saying, look, I don't want to be that, totally absent dad. I don't want to get a badge just because I show up and pick my kid up once a month. What comes first? Is it the human or the company that leads this change?
It's such an interesting question. This is the question I throw out to my students all the time when we talk about work-life balance. Who's responsible? Is it the individual? Is it the company? Is it something societal? I think the answer is all of the above. I think you can lead by example, which is the thing that individuals fear the most, because they fear, their jobs. But if they lead by example and they say, this is, in our research world, we would call this positive distinctiveness. We would say, we're not going to be like everybody else. We're going to show people that like that CEO that I mentioned that put his family schedule up on the whiteboard. That is an example of saying, this is my reality and deal with it. And I want your reality as well. Again, that's the approach that most individuals don't want to take. Now, you can, from an organizational standpoint, you can put a whole host of policies in place. And companies often do this. They put work-family policies in place. They did this even more so with COVID, but then nobody takes them, right? Nobody takes advantage of them because of that fear. Like I said before, the fear wins out. So, and this is research that's been going on for years that say that you don't utilize most of the family-friendly policies that are out there because of fear that they're going to lose their job or going to get demoted or be seen as counted out. So I think it has to start from both angles, but there's another one too. There's the people in the middle, right? The middle managers, who used to not have such an important role, right? There's probably a lot of memes about middle managers, and but if you empower the middle managers, who I think right now too during COVID are the ones that are really seeing the struggles that working parents are facing, and they're dealing it with them themselves, then I'm kind of a middle manager right now. I'm chair of my department. And so I see firsthand what some of my faculty are dealing with. And I'm willing to make concessions for them because I see what they're struggling with. I know what I'm struggling with, that things that maybe people in the senior leadership might not see because they're trying to come up with some holistic one size fits all policy for everybody, which is not to say that that's not meaningful. But what it comes down to is the people in the middle really having to kind of manage up and manage down at the same time around these issues.
I love hearing you say this, because one of the ideas early on for a slogan for the company of dads was change starts in the middle. And my wife thought that was a horrible idea, because she thought, nobody wants to be a middle manager. They're an emerging manager. I was like, okay, change starts with the emerging. That doesn't have the same ring to it as change starts. But I think like the people who are the senior executives now, who are running the companies, I would bet that they suffer from some form of confirmation bias. Whatever they did in life is what got them to that point. Whether they had a spouse who stayed at home, whether they had nannies and childcare, whether they, were somehow able to balance it. I don't know. But whatever they did got them there. But those managers who are, emerging managers, my term, middle manager, your term, professor. Just remember, you said middle manager, not me. Who are right there. They're closer to the people that they're managing, and they're closer to the experiences that those people are having right now. And, they, but for a few years ago were colleagues, and now there's a power dynamic, a power imbalance in place. What can the most senior leaders do to empower, those middle managers to make the changes to keep the workforce, productive, and to sort of give up the ghost that there's such a thing post 2020 as a distinction between home and work? What can those managers be empowered to do, the way you'd think of, a general empowering his field officers?
I mean, this might sound a little pie in the sky, but I wrote this down earlier, and I think it's important. I mean, I think there are certain, you can give managers a skill set, right, to normalize parental support, right? Just in the way you can provide other types of skills. I don't know that can happen from above, other than providing mechanisms to allow them to normalize that, right? If you're going to constantly put barriers up so that these managers can't actually manage, in many organizations, I mean, Google, for example, allegedly they're not really managers as we normally think of managers. It's not about command and control. It's not just about delegating tasks. It's about listening, right? It's about problem solving. And I think if you empower your managers to be problem solvers, right, to be listeners, and to not be so command and control, then you will allow them to, then that process can be facilitated. They will see normalizing, like I said, parental support as a management skill, as just part of their, daily repertoire of managerial tasks, on top of, all the other things that they have to worry about.
But in your research, particularly the research on pandemic parenting, are you seeing any sort of movement in that direction? Are there companies that are really trying to do this? Again, not out of sort of an enlightened self-interest. Like, if they don't do this, the system isn't going to work the way it did in 2019.
I think you're starting to see, and in some of the emerging research that I'm doing right now, and I don't have enough data points to say this, but these are things that we're sort of hypothesizing right now, is that I think, and what I'm doing, frankly, myself as a middle or emerging manager, I'll use your term now, is empowering myself to do the right thing, to lead with care, right, over and above whatever policies are out there, and then to pay the price later, or to manage up and say, you know what, these folks really need this kind of support, and here's the support that they need. What do you think about that? I actually just got off the phone. A couple of my colleagues, I'm doing scheduling right now, right? Teaching scheduling. And someone pointed out to me, wow, the way we schedule our classes really aren't all that amenable to working parent hours, because people are trying to figure out they can't really do the 8 a.m. classes. They really can't do the classes that end after 5 o'clock because of rush hour, and I thought, wow, that's my new thing. I'm going to senior leadership, and I'm going to, I'm going to talk about this, because we should be, that's a simple solution to a really difficult problem for so many people. And it's just another example of just being a little bit more flexible and thinking outside of the box. So again, these are anecdotes. I don't know that I could necessarily say research wise, but I think when you empower people, they're more likely to be creative and come up with creative solutions, and lead with care, like I said, than lead by policy.
Yeah, that's a great example. I mean, there's another piece in the paper I referenced early on, in which you wrote about something along the lines of, the downside of involved fathering is it involves companies questioning fathers' commitment to work. Now, of course, any working mom who would hear that would say, well, what the hell are you talking about, Sullivan? That's happened to working moms, forever. You're senior executive and it looks like you're choosing to go home to your family and not be at work. And I remember I went to Chicago for graduate school, and there's research, 20 years old now, but talked about, the penalty for women who stepped out of the workforce for some period of time versus those who never had kids and never had to step out of the workforce. And what it did, it was Chicago, so it was based on their compensation over the course of their career. But when that original point that involved fathering may come at a cost, and of course, involved mothering has already come at a cost. What do companies do? Because the flip side of that is, if you don't give people the space to be parents, whether fathers or mothers, what are they going to be? Are they really going to be like, the superstar employee, or are they going to be, a half miserable functionary who's not fulfilling his or her own potential? So how do you address that conundrum of almost kind of the knock that people have to take for being involved with their children?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it perfectly. Men are just experiencing what working dads that want to be more involved are experiencing, what working mothers have, experienced for a long period of time. And in a lot of cases, it's worse for men, right? Because the stigma has been shown to be far worse. If you ask for flexibility, and we may have talked about this before, but you can't take it too far too, because when men take it too far, then they're really counted out. And are they really management material? Or are they? But I think maybe we're just asking the wrong question, because I can remember there's a case study from Harvard Business School from years ago about it's the case of the part-time partner. It's about a woman who they want to promote her, but she's been part-time and there's no precedent for it. And in some of the commentary, it says something like, well, the question is, what's wrong with the person that does want to work long hours, right? Why can't we flip the script a little bit and say, what's wrong with the person that doesn't want to be home with their kids and family? And why can't we normalize that in organizations? And we're going to have to, frankly. I think companies now are starting to realize, given what we're learning about the Great Resignation and what COVID has sort of taught us, that people aren't going to stand for it anymore. They need that balance. Maybe it was that we wanted it before. Now we need it. It's an imperative now. It's not a nice to have. It's an imperative. It's what we all need for our mental health and sanity. And by the way, we're starting to talk about mental health now in a more normalized way. And I'm not equating work-life balance to mental health, but there is a lot of psychological and physical distress that comes with an inability to balance your work and family lives. And so as long as we can normalize those conversations and recognize that, I think companies now are starting to see, okay, this has got to be part of it's not just about, okay, great, we have this policy and this policy and this policy. We're done. We've done what we said we were going to do. No, it's about actually showing that you care and lifting that veil on, what these policies were intended to do, and actually saying we actually care. We can be a little bit more flexible, and we're not going to judge you for it. And again, I think it goes back to that leading by example. When you have executives and leaders in organizations that are doing just that, then it helps others to say, hey, okay, great, now I can see myself in that leader. So, I mean, I think it's still going to take a long time to lift, those norms and make that more of a reality. But, I think it's just an important, we don't have a choice. I mean, there's more dual career couples, there's more single parents out there. This is just a challenge that so many families, are facing, and they're going to, I think, push organizations in that direction, whether they like it or not.
I mean, in your research, are you seeing any sort of generational divides? Obviously a 25-year-old or 27-year-old is probably not even in middle management yet, let alone senior management. But are you seeing sort of the younger generation not sort of asking if they can have more time with their family, just taking it or assuming that this is just normal for them to have more time? I mean, are we, we put a lot of burden on millennials to sort of save us from climate change, but might they save us from this as well?
I mean, I have been telling my students for the better part of the last 10 plus years, like, we are counting on you. You say you want this flexibility. These are all the things that older generations have wanted but been afraid to ask. It's up to you to make that happen. Although I will say, I think they're a little bit, there's a little, they may say they want that flexibility. They may say they're willing to ask for it. I mean, I think they're not willing to go to companies that they can't when they can't get that. So their choices might be driving that. But at the same time, they still say, I want to work really, really hard for the first like 5 years of my life, and then I'll make so much money that I can, then I'll have all the balance in the world. And I always say, okay, if that happens, great, come back and, fund an endowed chair for me.
Right.
But it's probably not going to happen for most of you. I think I said that too, probably when I was an undergrad. But I do think that it's up to them to push the envelope, on some of these changes that we've kind of been hoping for a long time.
Professor, this has been great. Thank you for being my guest on the Company of Dads podcast. I always like to give my guests the last word. So last question, the last word. If you could say, speak directly to those middle managers, those senior managers, those HR executives, if you could tell them, one concrete thing that they could do that would make it easier for working mothers and lead dads to find fulfillment both at work and at home, what would you tell them to do?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that normalizing parental support as a management skill. Let's train managers how to be supportive. And again, it's not just parental support. I think there are other forms of support that are non-work related that we just have to start to normalize in organizations if we're going to expect the best from people. That we need to just recognize that people have lives outside of their workplace that are meaningful and important to them. And when those meaningful life scenarios are fulfilled, they'll probably be far better at work. They'll be happier at work. Certainly my research suggests that. They'll probably even identify even stronger with their career, knowing that they have, these other outlets in their life and they have the support from their managers or from HR or from their peers. So that's what I would say, is just normalize that support as much as possible and talk about it. These are conversations that have to be had in organizations. These are not just mother conversations. These aren't just father conversations. These are people conversations. This is life.
Thank you, Professor. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I'm grateful for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.